evening and welcome to this meeting of the Garrett Park Town Council. Today is Monday, December 11th, 2023. You have before you the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? If there are no changes, then the agenda is approved as distributed. Also in front of you are minutes from the special town council meeting, the council retreat that we held on October 31st. Are there any changes to these minutes? They were distributed in advance. If there are no changes or corrections, the minutes for the October 31st meeting are approved as distributed. Also before you are the minutes from the regular town council meeting on November 13th. These were distributed prior to this meeting, distributed a couple weeks ago. Are there any changes to those? If there are no changes, the minutes for the November 13th meeting are approved as distributed. Presentations by residents. Do we have any residents in the room or on Zoom?
Oh, you know what? I'll get on.
Okay, go.
I couldn't tell. Was that somebody chiming in, wanting to chime in?
I'm chiming. It's Jean Horan on Cambria Avenue. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Go ahead, Jean. Oh, what's your address?
Oh, okay, good. This is really quick. Before the start of the swim season last May, we made a request on behalf of the pool board to have the curbs painted, the no parking side of the street painted. We understood that there's a staffing issue, so we know that that didn't happen. In place, the town was wonderful about installing the wood post no parking signs along the, we'll call it the east side of Keswick. That really was effective. But what we've noticed is that either our neighbor or unnamed individuals are either removing those signs or they're ripped. And I would like to request that the town invest a little bit of money in permanent metal poles to place on Keswick again, so that we don't have cars parking both sides of the street, which make emergency vehicle entry and exit impossible. So that is my request, not only as a pool board member, but as I know Stephen can attest, we have a lot of neighbors on the Cambria, Raleigh area who are very concerned that people are following the rules of, the road, so to speak. So I would like to request that you continue moving forward with something permanent, please.
All right, thank you very much.
So will we be able to make something happen?
We will discuss it. That's not something that we can determine at this point. Right now, this is just a presentation by residents, so we'll add that to. Thank you so much.
All right, then just reiterating the fact that the temporary were awesome, but they are in no means going to be effective.
So I assume that you want these installed before the new swim season next summer? Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we have plenty of time.
Yes, the full. Yeah.
Okay.
And just to note, it's not just for pool traffic management and flow. If you think about the November Beer Fest, the Citizens Association was very thoughtful and very detailed with urging people to walk. When people don't see signs or when people choose to ignore what they think are temporary signs, sometimes that can get dangerous. So absolutely before May, just keeping in mind that there are other impacts on that green space. And so any time is good, but especially before May. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other residents wanting to address the council, make presentation? Okay. Then we shall move on to the fiscal year 2023 financial audit results. Mr. McCall, you are ready to, or you're welcome to join us.
I am. Good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, perfect. Well, my name is Stephen McCall. I'm a partner with SB and Company. We've served as the auditors for the town for the past few years. I've worked on the audit myself the past few years. We always have two partners involved in each one of our audits. So I have here our presentation of the audit results. I'll share my screen and walk through that presentation. And then, of course, pause at the end if there are any questions or things like that that you would all like to discuss. So again, as I mentioned, my name is Stephen McCall, audit partner with SB and Company. Chris Lehman, who's not with us tonight, who couldn't be on the call tonight. He was the engagement partner on the audit for fiscal year 2023. Our scope of services here, so we were engaged to audit the financial statements for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2023, as well as assistance with the uniform financial report filing. And then we always just want to make sure that you all are aware that we are available for year-round consultation. So not just during the audit time, anytime questions or things of that nature, arise during the fiscal year, we like to be involved in any of those conversations. It just makes, the audit at the end of the year, even easier once we're able to come in and already have some background knowledge on, some of the things that have been going on during the fiscal year. Summary of the results here. So we did issue an unmodified opinion. So that's a clean opinion and the best opinion that we can offer under professional standards. We did not discover any instances of fraud throughout the audit. We did not identify any material weaknesses in internal control. And of course, we did receive full cooperation from management. So management, was able to provide all the supporting documentation that we had requested and also to answer our questions. This slide here, and I won't spend a ton of time here, we're just an overview of our audit process. Kind of what we do or where we start our audit processes in the planning and understanding the business and the risk phase. What that does is allows us to understand what the risks to the organization, to the town are, based on the type of entity that you all are, as well as just what we know is going on in the industry. And then from there, that kind of drives our audit approach. We're then able to take our audit approach and make it specific to address those risks that we've identified. So you'll see we spend a lot of time there in the planning phase. Again, we'll then go through, understand what controls that management has in place to help mitigate those risks, and then we'll do some testing around those controls to make sure that those controls are both designed and operating effectively. Once we're able to go through and conclude on there, we'll do some analytics around the numbers to make sure that they make sense, kind of in line with, what we would expect. Testing year-end balances to verify those, such as cash and investments, again, to make sure those balances are correct. And then at the very end, making sure we're doing all of our proper reviews to ensure that we have done a gas compliant audit within professional standards. And here again, just high level of one of the things we do with the audit approach. So we do follow a COSO framework, looking at 5 interrelated components of the control environment. So you'll see there the environment, the risk assessment, control activities, information and communication, and then monitoring. Again, here, making sure we're looking at these items. We're reading board minutes, just to kind of get an understanding of what that tone at the top of the organization is. And then once we're able to go through and make that assessment, what we then do is do a more detailed look at some of the key processes that we identified throughout the audit. So we look at treasury to make sure, cash is being reconciled, investments, things of that nature. If there are any estimations involved in any of the numbers, we would take a look at those as well to make sure that those estimations make sense, are reasonable, and also fall within, ranges of what we would expect. When you're talking about financial reporting, looking at how well the books are kept, how the records are closed, whether management is able to provide information to support, what is in those records. And then, of course, taking a look at the expenditures, making sure those are all included in the appropriate period. And then revenue, again, making sure that revenue recognition is appropriate and things of that nature. So here again, just quickly on some of the audit risk areas. So we do spend a lot of time taking a look at the cash and investment reconciliations, again, to make sure that those are being performed timely on a periodic basis, making sure they are also being reviewed, right, by someone who's other than a preparer, and then making sure that those balances are correct and match what you have in your records. For liabilities, again, making sure that those are recorded in the appropriate period, taking a look at the fund balance in that position to make sure that those are appropriately classified within your financial statements. And again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, always taking a look at revenue recognition to make sure the timing of when revenue is being recognized is appropriate, given some of the different sources of funding, and then taking a look at the expenditures again to make sure that those are appropriate and also being recognized correctly throughout your financial statements. And then high level here, taking a look at the numbers of the results for fiscal year 2023. So you will see your total assets did increase about $700,000. You'll see a lot of that in your current other assets, mostly the cash and investments. So you'll see some increase there as you take a look at your total assets. That current liabilities line, so that is where the unearned revenue related to some of the COVID funding is sitting. I believe the majority of that, about $900,000 or so, is primarily what you see in that liability line, which is why that amount has grown so much from last year. And so those amounts will be recognized as revenue once those funds are expended. So you'll see in the next year that current liabilities number will go down, and then you'll see that associated revenue being recognized in fiscal year 2024. And then as you take a look at your net position, so again, the net investment, your capital assets, $2.6 million, and your unrestricted net position, $2.7 million. That's increasing based on the positive net income that the town has for fiscal year 2023. And then as we take a look at your statement of activities, so again, from an overall revenue perspective, fairly consistent with what you've seen year over year. You see some fluctuation between categories, but overall, $1.9 million versus $1.8 million in the prior year. And then same as you take a look at your expenses, do see some increase in expenditures there, right, as we would expect with pay raises and things of that nature year over year. So you'll see total expenses of $1.6 million, again, pretty consistent with what you've seen last year. And then that overall change in that position, that net income, if you will, of $250,000 for fiscal year 2023. So overall, another good year for the town. And then the last part of our presentation here just walks through our required communications to you all as governance. Again, what we do throughout the audit to make sure that the statements are good under GAS. We take a look at the significant accounting policies to make sure that they're okay, make sure there's nothing too aggressive or too conservative as it relates to the accounting policies. If we had any audit adjustments, we will be required to report that to you all as well. You'll see here that we did not have any past audit adjustments throughout the audit. Again, if we had identified anything from a fraud perspective or identified any material weaknesses in internal control, we would be required to report that to you all as well. But again, as you see here, nothing of that nature to communicate. Here again, we're not aware of any other information being contained in the financial statements. No difficulties in getting through the audit. Again, as we mentioned, very cooperative working with management. We were able to obtain all support, have all of our questions answered. And then we did receive a written representation letter from management as part of the completion of the audit. What that letter was just essentially management accepting responsibility for those financial statements. So again, as you see, through what we've talked about here, nothing from a negative nature to report at all as it relates to the audit results or the audit process. Then again, here at the very end, we do have our contact information. As I mentioned, do want to make sure that we are available and a resource and a partner, throughout the year, not just at the end of the audit time. So our contact information is here for you all to reach out, if you do have questions.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Can you go back really quick to just a few pages from the end, the required communications?
Yes, ma'am.
Number 2, keep going. There you go. Significant accounting policies. you said that this piece looks at whether we're too aggressive or too conservative in our,
Correct.
in our, in our thinking about our budget. Can you go into that a little bit more about how, because you said there wasn't anything of significance. Hard to say, well, what didn't you find significant? But we hear concerns about our being either too aggressive or too conservative. And I just wanted to get a sense of what would you be looking for? What would be an indication that we were being either too aggressive or too conservative? If you could look specifically at our numbers.
Yep, nope, and that's a good question. So when we're going through and looking at the financial statements, particularly where you'll see where accounting usually can either, like you said, can either be too aggressive or conservative, is really when you're looking at the recognition of either revenue or expenditures throughout your financial statements. When we take a look at the revenue, for example, how you all have the COVID funds in the current year, right? There are specific restrictions around how that money can be spent and the revenue recognition criteria around that, meaning that those funds can only be recognized as revenue once they're spent. So something too, aggressive would be, trying to recognize those amounts as revenue, right? Before those funds are actually spent and those criteria are met. And then on the other hand, too conservative as it relates to expenditure recognition. Again, kind of holding back on recognizing those expenditures, although those commitments have been made and payments have gone out the door. So things of that nature is what we're really looking at when we talk about making sure that none of the numbers or none of the judgments that are rolling through those financial statements are too aggressive or conservative.
Thank you.
So one other question, under investment policies, it says that the town has no policy regarding concentration of credit risk. Do most towns of our size have such a policy? And would you recommend that?
Yeah, and so as far as the town itself, I'm not 100% sure if I've seen any other towns around your size. So from that comment specifically, not 100% sure, but we always recommend that, all of our clients who have investments, kind of have that policy around, like you said, the concentration of credit risk is actually one of the things that we take a look at as well as we go through the audit. So if, one of our clients does have that policy, what we'll actually do is we'll compare, right, what they said they want their investments to be in versus what the actual is at that year in time. Because again, from a management standpoint, right, that's important for for the town or whomever owns those investments, right, as part of their strategy. So we do take a look at that, and we absolutely recommend that that's something that you all have in place.
Go ahead.
One other quick question, following up on the mayor, who I guess we heard that we have sort of a Goldilocks strategy, which is not too conservative, not too liberal, but just right. But I wonder also with regard to our increase in net position of about 5%, which seems pretty good. But I also wonder, it's lower than inflation probably was at that time. And I mean, do you have any comment about sort of what a good benchmark would be for that change?
Yeah, and that's a really good question as well. I mean, just off the top of my head, I don't have an answer for that one. I apologize. I can definitely circle back and get you some more information on that. I just don't know if. I mean, so it's a tough question to answer with, knowing how the environment and everything fluctuates right year over year. So I don't know that off the top of my head if I can say that there's a right or wrong answer, right, as far as a benchmark that's out there.
Okay, thank you.
And I have another question. I'm not quite sure if it's necessarily for you, Stephen, or if it would be more for Town Manager Matthews, but in page 22 of our report, it talks about compensated absences and how our liability for vacation time is currently at about $21,000, but the fund from which we pull that is at $97,000. So our liability is significantly lower than the amount that we have there. Are we just keep putting more money into this reserve fund? Should we draw it down?
We're reallocated to other
Reallocate
projects.
Or something, or is it prudent?
This would be a question for me, Mayor, not for Mr. McCall.
Okay.
This is an issue that Mary and I actually have talked about fairly recently. Mary Retke, that is our accountant, was on the call. My understanding is that prior administrations kind of took every employee had the maximum amount of leave that they could possibly have as of June 30th on the books, which obviously does not often mirror reality. So Mary and I have talked about going into the FY 2025 budget process of trying to refine that number and bringing back a recommendation to you in all likelihood to reduce that reserve figure.
Okay, good, thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Mackel? And I do apologize for having mispronounced your name earlier.
No, it is all right.
Not hearing any. Thank you very much, sir.
Not a problem, and I will absolutely circle back with some information on the other question.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.
Thank you.
The time is 7:53, and we are ready for the town manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. Included in your agenda packet is the financial report for the month of November. A couple things I just wanted to point out to you. On the revenue side of things, we've had a lot of discussion during my tenure here about income taxes and just the difficulty in projecting this revenue source, and certainly that has been exacerbated, as I've commented on many times, by the pandemic, specifically the extension of filing deadlines and the lack of enforcement by the state. Those efforts have now resumed, but the combination of the extension of filing deadlines and the lack of enforcement and the resumed enforcement means that we are seeing even more skewed revenue patterns. I think as evidence of that, I guess it's a good news thing. We've received an unusually high income tax payment in the month of November. The amount of that payment was $429,654. To put that into perspective, in recent years, our entire income tax receipt balance in FY 2019 was $467,000 roughly, to a high of roughly $640,000 in FY 2023. So income tax payments during the pandemic and post-pandemic are making this revenue source even more difficult to project. As of November 30th, we are already, because of the unusually large payment we got in November, we are already at 92.6% of the budgeted amount in only 5 months.
I want to ask something really quick about that.
Sure. Just some information that was provided by the state as part of the transmittal. The largest part of the payment that we received was actually a reconciling distribution for returns that were filed through the October filing extension deadline. This is general information that's provided by the Maryland Comptroller's Office, not necessarily directly on point with Garrett Park, but their comment was that the returns that they are seeing have typically been higher income, more complex, meaning a small number of late returns can have a significant impact on the distribution that the local government jurisdictions are receiving. The Comptroller's Office advised that they are continuing to receive late file returns and will continue to do so into December. Obviously, one of the things the Comptroller's Office is watching is just with Maryland's low unemployment rate and job growth expecting to slow. They are expected to start seeing some kind of right sizing, if you will, or slowdowns in terms of what we've been seeing as receipts, but they're not able to offer any guidance on the timing of those slowdowns and to what degree they will occur. Mayor, did you say you had a question?
I did. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that the fact that we got a payment of $429,000, that doesn't mean that we can expect that our overall we're going to blow out our projections by that much, but merely
No.
it could be that it was just the timing of the payment. I mean, clearly we will probably exceed the budgeted amount, the expected
Correct.
amount, but just because we had a big chunk now doesn't mean that we're going to blow it out by that much.
That would be correct. I think it's just one of those things that we're going to have to watch and see as the returns are coming in. The payments are being made. Tomorrow I will make it a note to myself to send you a chart. I basically track, have gone back since to FY 2019, I think it's far back, and basically tracked monthly what income tax receipts have looked like in some attempt to draw any correlation from one year to another. And I think it will help illustrate the difficulty with this revenue source. I'll send that to you all tomorrow. But Mayor, I think your assessment at this point would be correct. Based on, I don't think it's a given, is what I would say, that we're going to blow out the budget to that extent. But certainly we should have no difficulty meeting the budgeted amount for this fiscal year. I feel confident in saying that to you. Other report highlights, and I'll just be brief. We talked about this last month, basically with interest rates remaining high. We're obviously seeing investment revenues exceeding the budgeted amount. One of the things that Mary Rutke and I have been talking about the latter part of last fiscal year and into this fiscal year is just really trying to analyze our cash flow needs based on when we expect projects to go out to bid, and basically just making sure that we're placing funds with the Montgomery County Investment Pool or in CDs through our depository bank. Also thought you might be interested in how much we've spent this year on tree-related activities. So year to date, through the end of November, we've expended approximately $55,000 on tree-related activities. Those include removals, pruning, elevation, as well as plantings. I did want to call to your attention, and this Mary did this at my direction. Year to date, I have asked Mary to basically account for our tree-related activities in the operating budget. That is more consistent with customary budgeting standards. I would note that previously the town has accounted for some certain tree activities, tree removals, not all, and tree planting in the capital budget. Typically what you include in your capital budget is going to be something that has a certain useful life, but also is subject to depreciation. Obviously, removing a tree is not depreciated, it's just gone from your assets. And the useful life of trees is anyone's guess. I have reviewed kind of where we're at with Phil Normandy. I don't believe there will be any difficulty in continuing to book tree-related work in the operating budget for FY 2024. Obviously, if the mayor and town council either want more information or you're uncomfortable with that, you can certainly do journal entries and reverse those entries. Assuming that you are comfortable with the practice, what that would mean is that there is certain capital funding that is in the Arboretum line item that could be freed up for other purposes, and that's something you can talk about at a future date if you would like. Also, just as I mentioned at the last meeting, because I do think it is worth noting for the record, certain journal entries were made, as I shared with you at the last meeting, in anticipation of the ordinance you'll be considering later this evening for Budget Amendment 1. Those expenses include the purchase of the replacement pickup truck, the camera installation at Penn Place, and the entry door to the post office lobby. Those journal entries had to be made last month so that everything would flow normally with the budget amendment. Should that ordinance not pass, then those journal entries would be reversed. But that's why you see several accounts currently in the ARPA capital budget that have negative balances. They will remain in a negative position until that ordinance is adopted and it actually takes effect, which will not be until early January. Are there any questions about the financial report before I move on? Okay. Just a quick update on 11321 Kenilworth Avenue, the former Yendel property. Demolition work finally got underway the week of November 27th, and they actually finished up last Friday. So the work happened very quickly. Did want to give a shout out to REMAC USA. They did a great job during that work, and also I think just being respectful of the sensitivity of the trees on the site. And Phil Normandy, our arborist, also took a look during the work and then following the completion, and he was also very pleased. We had our engineering firm stop by today to do a site inspection. I am currently awaiting, just for our files, copies of the geotechnical analysis reports from the fill and compaction work, and then REMAC just has a few other items they need to submit, and we will be paying them and closing out that contract. We recently obtained pricing for We're in the process of obtaining pricing for removal of invasives and tree pruning work on the Yendel property. That's in the works, but has not occurred. But once we receive that, it will be done by one of our companies that is already under contract. We'll be proceeding with that work.
Barb, is that, or the funds for that, the grant that you received for the Yendel property, is that the source of funds?
We actually, there's two sources of fundings for all the work at Yendel. The town budgeted funds for certain baseline activities before we received the grant, and that included demolishing the house as well as the tree-related work. Those were referenced in the scope of the grant, so it's, we can kind of call whatever we want to call the project cost, if you will, but those were baseline activities that my assumption at this point is that the town will basically pay for those, Councilmember Max, because that's something that's already in our budget. And then the grant funding, I specifically requested it for park design services and actual establishment and construction of the park. From the state standpoint, anything I referenced in the application, they consider to be part of the project and is eligible for reimbursement. But we do have essentially a 25% match because we're also using program open space funds for the project in addition to the community parks and playground grant. I'm hoping in January to issue the request for proposals for park design services. That scope of work will include the preparation, at least my thinking, of several conceptual designs that will basically be predicated on the recommendations that were made by members of the Parks and Open Spaces Committee, specifically the creation of a passive meditative park. That is also what we referenced in the grant application. And obviously there are also certain parameters that will guide the development of the park on that site by virtue of the deed of conservation easement.
I want to pause really quick there and just make sure that you all, I know you caught that, but I just want to emphasize that that this RFP for design services will use as the basis the recommendations that the Parks Committee made when they were when they were active earlier in last year. So that is, that's the basis for it. And this is not just asking for random designs with no parameters.
Are we gonna put that parks and open space back to have them reflect on what the proposals are, the designs, or how are we gonna decide who's gonna decide what we're gonna do with the
Well, that's a council decision to decide.
So we're not gonna go back to parks and open space?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't want to commit to that
Okay.
in either direction. We're looking, I think Barb, you said January is
Yeah,
when you're
my
hoping
thought
to.
is to issue it in January, and then obviously that contract will come back to the town council for award. One thing I did just want to note is, and I've had some discussions with Montgomery Planning about this over the past couple of months, and this may be new to Councilmember Eisenstadt, the rest of you probably may recall this. We are subject as a local government entity to a planning process called mandatory referral. We are taking essentially what was a single family residential piece of property and turning it into something that is not that. Therefore, we are subject to the mandatory referral process through Montgomery Planning. This is a process that local governments go through. Part of the discussion I had with the person who runs that process at Montgomery Planning is how do we, basically, what's the process I would go through if we come up with several conceptual designs before we have the community weigh in on those, that we make sure Montgomery Planning would actually approve them, candidly. So they have advised me that there is kind of a informal consultative kind of process that we can go through, and we actually have some conceptual designs that we're comfortable with. We then will need to go through this informal process through Montgomery Planning, make sure that they would be okay with them. Then we're kind of free to circulate those. We can certainly circulate them before. I just hesitate to have people get excited about something that Montgomery Planning may not actually approve. And then if we will have to go back to a formal mandatory review process. So my thought would be to go through kind of an informal process as we're working through some conceptual designs. I've shared some information already with Montgomery Planning just because eventually this will be coming before them. You know, and we'll just have to kind of work through that procedural part of it. So it's not totally within our control, I guess is my point, what happens on that site. They certainly understand the basic vision that the town has in terms of it being a passive park, remaining in a wooded setting.
And the committee, the citizen committee, what will be their point of involvement?
So that committee is not, it's not a standing committee. It was an ad hoc committee to come up with ideas for that property, which they did.
So we just carry it forward from there.
We could, no. I don't know. I guess there are other things I'm thinking about, so I kind of was gonna wait and see what we get back and sort of punt on that decision.
Okay, fair enough.
Just a sort of a tangential issue, nothing that necessarily you need to talk tonight, but I did want to just mention it to you. So obviously during the demolition process, the gate at the end of Kenilworth remained open because Remac USA had large trucks and there's a lot of construction on Kenilworth. Both the mayor and I received inquiries from certain residents in light of that gate being open who expressed interest in possibly leaving, essentially, you know, not having a gate or leaving it open. There's a lot of history about this that the town archivist was able to share with me. You know, I will leave that to you all to discuss at some future date, whether that's anything that you want to talk about further, but I did just want to mention that both the mayor and I were contacted by some residents who expressed interest in not having the gate there once they saw it open during this process.
I would definitely be interested in getting this on an agenda, circulating that information, the history of it from the archivist and getting it on an agenda.
And also, I would like the rest of the people who would be affected by opening or closing the gate to ask them to weigh in on what they would like. I think that would be important for people who live on that street.
Yeah, so I will send you the information that Claire McDonald provided to me about it. And certainly whenever that gets scheduled, we could certainly notify people. Just in reading back through the history, it's clear that there are also people who feel equally strongly probably about the gate remaining, you know, in its current state.
I would also like to add that I don't believe that's actually a road, or at least it's not structured as a road. Like, we might have to do some type of improvement if you're going to end up putting regular vehicle traffic through there.
It was purposely not paved as a vehicle road by one of the biggest proponents of keeping the gate closed when she was mayor a couple years ago.
Right.
Kind of moving on, town office renovation projects progressing well. I had put in my report that we were close to finalizing a contract with Turnkey Properties. In fact, that will be scheduled to be signed tomorrow. You know, they will obviously need to secure permits from the county, but assuming that all goes smoothly, I'm hopeful that you know, the sledgehammer will start falling still in the month of December. Just as a reminder, we are going to be doing the work in phases just so that we can minimize the disruption to those of us who work in the office and our ability to serve the public well. You know, we've selected the furnishings. They have, most of those have been ordered. We have listed some of the surplus furniture items on the public surplus auction site. I would note that typically in my experience, there's not much of a resale market for used office furniture, but we're certainly going to give it a try. I wanted to bring you all up to date, as well as some members of the public who are on this call, about our discussions with the county regarding stormwater ownership and maintenance of stormwater infrastructure in Garrett Park. This has been an ongoing discussion between the town and Montgomery County Department of Transportation for more than a year now. I would say those discussions have certainly been cordial, though we certainly have had our disagreements. We have submitted information in support of our position that the county should continue to maintain the storm drainage systems in Garrett Park that exist today, unless they are otherwise in a town easement, as well as the county adding new parts to the system in the future as the need arises. The county certainly provided data that certainly made its point in their opinion, that supported an alternative outlook on the matter. I think at this juncture, I think it's fair to say, and the mayor has been a part of all of those discussions. So Joanna, please feel free to jump in at any time. But I would say at this juncture, I think the party sort of acknowledged that we're sort of on an impasse in our respective positions of who owns and who is responsible for maintenance of stormwater infrastructure in Garrett Park and who is responsible for the construction of any new parts to the system. The county has offered to provide technical guidance and assistance to the town. I think that offer was sincere, and in fact, they have already done so on one instance. So there are really two courses of action that the mayor and town council could elect to take. One is litigating the matter. This would not be a type of issue that the town attorney would represent us on. We would need to retain litigation counsel. The cost of litigation would depend on a number of factors, including whether the case would settle early, if either party chose to appeal any decision that was made at a lower court level, assuming we got to that point. It's also equally difficult for me to tell you what the likelihood of success would be. Certainly we feel like we had good facts on our side, otherwise we wouldn't have spent the last year sharing those with the county. But I think in general, litigation is a bit of a crapshoot. How things turn out can't be predicted with any certainty. If there is interest in discussing the option of pursuing this matter through litigation, that is not something you should be discussing to any great extent this evening. That is something that is more appropriately discussed in closed session with the town attorney, so he can provide the benefit of his legal counsel on the matter. The other course of action that the mayor and town council could elect to take is to just simply move forward with acceptance of ownership and maintenance of the existing stormwater infrastructure in the town, as well as the cost of any future additions to that system. If so, we will certainly need to identify an ongoing financing source for any stormwater management work. You may have noticed that there is some funding that is in the capital budget that exists, but I would say what we have in there could probably be completely expended on one fairly simple stormwater project. It is costly work. There are really generally two ways to pay for stormwater infrastructure, and we can talk about these in more detail at a future date. I imagine this is something you will want to talk about, especially going into the FY 2025 budget. There are several municipalities in Montgomery County and certainly across the country that have what is referred to as a stormwater utility fee. Two of the jurisdictions in the county that have them are two municipalities that I previously worked for. Those programs have been in place for some time. And the other is certainly to pay for stormwater work just through your general taxing authority, which means property taxes for municipalities in Maryland. Another step besides identifying a funding source, if this is the route you choose to go, is the town will need to develop a policy in advance of taking on any work. In my opinion, that would be the most judicious course of action. That policy would specify what projects would be eligible for town funding and how we would prioritize them, because I've never met a jurisdiction that had stormwater issues that didn't have more needs than they had money. So that is sort of where we stand at this point. Joanna, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, a little bit. And a little editorializing, I'll give my opinion on this, and that is, I get my Chevy Chases all mixed up. So Barb, what is it Chevy Chase Village that,
They're correct.
that is where their system is owned by the county, but because there's such a backlog?
Yes, you're correct. Chevy Chase Village, and it's a mishmash in the county. There's a lot of, once again, we can talk about this in more detail at a future date, but municipalities in the county are situated differently, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There are some who have elected to have their own stormwater programs, Tacoma Park being one of them, Rockville being another, and they are basically, that's noted basically in law that those municipalities have elected to go that route. There are others, as the mayor is alluding to, such as Chevy Chase Village, that the county does have jurisdiction for stormwater in certain municipalities in the county. Chevy Chase Village has elected to They have one area in town, I apologize, I'm not that familiar with Chevy Chase Village, but it's about a one block area that has significant flooding in the backyards. They can have water, as I understand it from their manager, still standing in the backyard a week after rain has stopped falling. They've elected to use some of their ARPA funds for that project. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's probably over $1 million in cost. Ultimately, the county is still somewhat involved because, pipes have to connect somewhere. So the county, isn't involved, as I understand it, from a financial standpoint, but certainly they had to secure approval from the county for their own design because the ultimate connection is to a county system.
My understanding of that situation is that Chevy Chase Village entered into an agreement with a partnership with the county that said, we want to do this work because we need it to get done, and we can't wait. Our residents can't wait until you clear the county backlog for this work to be done on county dime or on county timeline. So our taking this action does not indicate our accepting ownership of the county, or from the county. So essentially, even the jurisdictions, even the municipalities where there's no question of ownership, they're still having to do the work and they're still having to pony up the money for it.
But they got the money from ARPA, what you're saying.
Well,
in that case.
Yes, they happen to be using ARPA funds,
Right.
but what I mean is that even if we were to litigate this, that may not get us anything. There may be zero benefit to that.
Do we know of any municipalities that have litigated and won?
I'm not aware of any, but I'm also going to add, I don't know of any who've litigated it. So the fact that no one has won is simply because I don't know of anyone who's taken that course of action.
So as Barb said, we kind of have two directions we could go. We could my dream scenario would be we move forward with this, or like we move forward and we take action and we fix our situation. We get it up to a solid state, and then we go back to the county and say, look, we have things in pristine. We did everything according to your standards. We consulted with you. We now have a perfectly functioning, wonderful system. Will you please take ownership now? And then we could, in the long run, get them to take ownership when there's no work to be done. That would be my dream scenario.
But we can't make them do that.
We absolutely cannot.
So could we meet with the lawyer and then try and see what the lawyer says and then proceed anyway, but seek, as Chevy Chase did, to get some sort of document to try and pass the responsibility to that?
So essentially, we would have to sue the county and get a judge to say that the county's arguments for ownership being Garrett Park, I mean,
Are erroneous.
yes, I would rather not go the litigation route. I'll just go ahead and say that. I don't have a vote, so it doesn't really matter, but I think that it would slow us down. It wouldn't help us solve anything.
We could proceed anyway, though, right? Just as you said, the dream scenario, just with a litigation possibility on the side. No?
What, if I may, one of the factors that the county used as in its kind of counterpoint, if for those of you who are of an age, you remember 60 Minutes and that whole segment, was the mere fact that there were two things that, not the only things they mentioned, but one is that when the town adopted its charter, it, as best as I can tell, and in talking to Claire McDonald, it took the MML model charter at that time, which references stormwater responsibilities, but that is something that we have taken on as a municipality. Our response was, look, there's lots of things in here, such as zoning authority, which we have no legal right to undertake. But just because you say you can do it doesn't mean you intended to do it. The county also pointed out the fact that we had funding in our budget for stormwater as a further acknowledgement of the town's acknowledgement that this was its responsibility. Then you add on where they found records where the town had actually undertaken stormwater projects. So those are some of the arguments that the county kind of raised as in its point. We obviously had our facts that obviously pointed out other things that were more to our benefit.
The other thing that they brought up was the fact that when all this was turned over, there was nothing definitive that said the Garrett Parks portion went and was turned over to the county. And they looked at old WSSC maps, as did we, and neither one of us could necessarily, as I recall, point to a specific spot.
So in other words, they were saying we weren't paying into their system. And so if we weren't paying into the system, then we don't have any right to.
No,
have-
And just for benefits,
Is that
so,
what you meant, Phil? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
speak
I'm
over you
sorry,
or misinterpret you.
no, what, at one point, WSSC owned the entire stormwater system, and then they turned it over to the county. And there was no definitive record that showed that our portion was ever conveyed to the county.
yeah, so to add to that, when WSSC basically had to revert to the county municipalities, there was affirmative action that had to be taken. I did find a letter in the files that, at least to me, suggested that the town had somewhat taken that affirmative action. There was also a levy that at one time was assessed against those municipalities who were part of the county system, and there was no evidence that we had ever paid it. Now the county has ceased charging that levy to anyone. So I think it's, you know, as I said, I think, you know, get two parties in court and you'd likely have a 50-50 chance. So.
And I'm sorry, just for clarification on that last thing, this is not the same as the rainwater
Correct.
tax that we've got now. It's totally different.
What is the rainwater tax for, Phil?
That's for rain gardens, for trying to reduce the amount of runoff being sent down
Yeah,
into
it's-
Rock
yeah.
Creek or other
It's often
watersheds.
referred to as a water quality tax.
Yep.
The document Phil was talking about earlier that it wasn't clear whether it was conveyed. I think that was what, like 1968 or 69.
It goes
So this
back
is a very old,
literally decades.
very old question.
Yeah,
So-
you know, as to Todd's point, I think if this is something, you know, you just wanted to have a conversation with Ron Bolt, you know, once again, he's been quite clear, he would not be the person who would serve as litigation counsel. We would need to find litigation counsel. Ron obviously would have, you know, already has a name he shared with me. So I think the question is, you know, do you want to have a closed session and discuss this with Ron Bolt? And I don't think you need to make a decision tonight. I would say if this is something that either direction you go has cost associated with it, and that is something that, particularly if the ultimate goal of the mayor and town council is to have a stormwater program, then certainly as part of the FY 2025 budget, we should start that process of figuring out how we're going to fund it.
And do you have any idea about how much this would cost, more or less, within?
I mean, I think, you know, there are certain properties, and there is one of our residents who is on this call right now, that has been in communication with the town. And there was some preliminary design work done prior to my tenure with the town, you know, identifying, you know, probably what a solution would be. That information, actually, as I mentioned, the you know, county has offered some technical assistance during our calls. They've reviewed, you know, kind of what approach our engineering firm had recommended. You know, there's fundamental agreement about what would need to be done, which is essentially upsizing a pipe. You know, they had a few other things that they suggested, but my rough guess, obviously you never know until you go out to bid, but I would say there is a decent likelihood that everything that is currently budgeted for stormwater in the capital budget could be almost fully used up on that one project alone. Just to give you an idea, you very rarely do stormwater projects that are not in the 6 digits.
It's a big liability. And as the climate continues to warming, it's going to get worse. My understanding, Barb, is that some of the pipes that make up the stormwater management system are other people, like the county's pipes, and then they come to ours. So it's not like our system is a standalone system.
Definitely
it's going to
not.
have a lot of impact on
Correct.
the county and other people who have other
Yeah.
responsibility for those pipes.
I mean, that's correct. I mean, ultimately, you know, there is, I would say, based on my discussions with our engineering firm and with, the town attorney, who certainly has some knowledge of drafting easements in the past, I think it would be probably a stretch to say we have really what I would say is a system here in Garrett Park. We have isolated small projects, but ultimately there is nothing we would do here that is not going to connect to a county system ultimately.
Right.
So we don't need to make a decision tonight,
Yeah.
but if there's a consensus to maybe not pursue, but at least get more information about litigation direction, we can get that moving. Conversely, if there's no appetite to even head down that road and we can cut that off, we could also move forward and get a jump start on the next phase. So I don't know, I mean, we have all 5 of you here. Does anybody have an interest in getting more information about the litigation?
I have a question about that. So you're saying, I guess one option is to move forward with litigation. The other is to just try to ignore the county and just move on, fixing things. Would the latter be, even though we're in a different situation than Chevy Chase Town or Village, whichever one it is? That sounded like they were trying to do the work because they couldn't wait decades for the county to get around to it, but then they were trying to make it clear that just because they're doing it to get it done, it doesn't mean that they're going to own it. Will we be doing the same thing? We'd be saying
so they're in a different, so Chevy Chase Village is in a different circumstance from us. The county acknowledges ownership of the Chevy Chase system. The county does not acknowledge ours. And what they've basically said to us is, we kind of don't want to keep talking. This was where County Councilwoman Kate Stewart was able to be so useful for us. Is she basically said, hey guys, how about we all stop arguing about who owns it and let's try to just see how the county can actually have be helpful. I mean, it was a way of blocking the logjam to some extent. So we kind of tabled the discussion with the county about ownership because we weren't going anywhere.
But the helpful technical support, the technical helpful part that the county's saying they're willing to do doesn't include paying for it. And it could be a really big number.
It's going to be a really big number.
To understand.
Oh, no, it's going to be a huge number.
Yeah, we don't have a source of funds for that.
We do
So
not.
I would propose just spending an hour with the attorney and just seeing what he, right? Or
Yeah,
what they
Ron,
say,
yes.
Yeah.
what they say.
Okay, all
And
right.
then moving forward also on the other plan.
So Phil said he also wants to at least get a little more information. So I don't know, the rest of you want to chime in or just?
I would agree. One last discussion before we go one way or the
I mean,
other.
Ron put the evidence together and met with the county, so he's very familiar with the strength of our case. So I would like his direction as to what his advice would be about what we should do to pursue this, because this is a big old maid card.
Okay. Yeah. That is a really good way of describing it.
If I may, I just want to make sure, one of the things that I believe, based on my conversations with Ron Bolt, he would probably recommend is prior to scheduling the closed session, I would like to work with Ron to probably at least identify someone who would be a probable party who would actually litigate this on behalf of the town and share that information with them, because I think that was one of Ron's suggestions. Obviously, if you're wanting to assess the probability of, prevailing in litigation, we probably should try to loop in someone who would be the most likely party to be representing us in that.
Or to see if we could come up with some kind of a joint
Or a budget.
responsibility with the county and see if we can, short of
settle.
litigation, do
Yeah.
something that would
Yeah.
help us resolve this problem and have some resources to do it.
Yeah.
So just to reiterate, even if we were successful in litigating it, it would probably be decades before the county had any funds or resources to do the work.
Yeah, I mean, the county, I think they truly do believe that, the argument that they have postured, and I'm not trying to suggest otherwise. I would also say that they have, you think about the scope of Montgomery County and you think about the scope of what is happening from a stormwater perspective, there's not enough funds. So there's certainly, I never expected them to easily kind of pony up and say, sure, we'll take that on, because that becomes a domino with every other municipality who's also struggling with this issue.
But if
But
our
it's a good point.
system ties into their system, we might still require their
we
system
would.
to be repaired before our system's gonna work.
Right, what would end up happening, just based on the one issue that we do have a resident who's on, it's property around Claremont, that some of you are very familiar with. I don't think, basically, the county did have their one of their contractual engineering firms sort of look at what, what the design work that had been done before. I think there's basic agreement in terms of what the fix is. As I said, they were helpful in, identifying a few other things that, we would want to incorporate into a project if we were to go that route. But they're going to look at what is the connection to their system, and basically, you don't just look at what is needed to solve the problem in Garrett Park. And this is just stormwater management generally. You look at what are the downstream impacts and what
Right.
has to happen to those. And if you're the one causing those impacts, then you're the one who pays for them. I think can't say this definitively, but I think if there was a stormwater project in Garrett Park that was, bordered an area in the county, unincorporated county, that also needed some work, that's where you might see some, possible leveraging of resources or partnership. I think in the absence of that, if it is strictly a problem that's more Garrett Park centric, the county might offer some technical assistance, as they did, or guidance or review, but they're not going to be opening up their checkbook because they've got their own problems to deal with.
Right.
So let's move on, but let's plan to.
Plan an
let's-
executive session
Let's get
sometime
an
in-
executive session. and-
Talk to Ron and
And-
talk to
okay, thank
his
you.
litigation
Yeah.
counsel.
Just one other quick thing, or two quick things. One is, I did send something out on the listserv, but we have signed a proposal with Empire Landscape to remove invasive understory trees on the Grotto property. These are all very small trees. It's not going to impact the wooded appearance of the property. Since I wrote the report, Empire may start as early as Wednesday. It's a little unclear. They're trying to just assess their other projects, but they may be on site as early as Wednesday. I have been in touch with all the immediate neighbors to the property, as well as the Pratt family, and advised them that work would be commencing. And I think that's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, time is 8:34. Moving on to adoption of ordinance number 2023-5.
This is the ordinance that was introduced at your meeting in November. Just as a reminder, it would modify how certain capital projects are funded, moving certain projects to the capital ARPA budget and taking the non-ARPA funding previously allocated for these projects and moving it to the town hall. So the 5 specific projects are the recently purchased pickup truck and associated equipment, the exterior painting of Penn Place, the camera installation at Penn Place, the replacement of the Penn Place entry door to the post office lobby, and the purchase of replacement light poles and fixtures on Strathmore. Combined, the anticipated cost of these projects is $243,247. And at this juncture, staff would recommend that the town council adopt ordinance number 2023-5.
Barb, is there a reason we're not including in this list of items the work we're doing on renovation of Penn Place and all of that money?
The town office renovation was already an ARPA-funded project,
Okay.
so it's already in ARPA.
Okay.
So what happens if, so this is the anticipated cost is 243,000. Is the ordinance is for funding those items, or is it for that amount?
Some of these projects were already done. That's why you see journal entries that are in the negative in your financial report.
Mm-hmm.
These are all projects that have either already been completed and final costs are known, or have they been contracted. So
they're fixed amounts?
they're fairly fixed. There might be, I have not actually received the invoice for the carpentry work associated with the exterior painting of Penn Place. So I had to make a guesstimate of that in conjunction with George, but we shouldn't be too far off the mark on these. It's within probably a couple $1,000.
but the ordinance is written in such a way that we wouldn't be in violation if we went over this amount?
No,
Okay.
no.
Move to adopt ordinance number 2023.5.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, excellent. The motion is passed and the ordinance is adopted. Time is 8:36 and we move on to unfinished business. Town hall, man, this is sticky, guys. I thought we were getting a handle on this, but we are. It's tough.
It's a tricky little building.
It is a tricky little building. So at our last meeting, we looked at a concept that Councilmember Paskowski put together that worked on the assumption that we would be able to use the shell, the exterior walls, for the back addition. When we, just a few days after the meeting, we talked with the architect who's been working on this project with us, Greg Wiedemann, and what he said and what we've sort of, I don't know, come around to, but it seems that while it is possible to use the exterior shell and modify it, retrofit it, there's a way to maintain it, that the more cost-effective thing, the more forward-looking thing, the more future investing thing would be to plan to take off the walls and put up all new walls for the rear addition and keep the foundation. Now, Steve, because you were also on this call, Barb also, if you want to chime in and fill in any places where I'm getting this wrong, but that was one of the takeaways from the conversation, which I'm not gonna lie, kind of felt a little bit like a gut punch.
He kind of came around to that. He was, at first he started out, he was pretty adamant that you needed to just start over with new additions, but then once he started understanding more of what we're up against, of kind of like we're trying to pack a little bit more program in there, and we're trying not to overspend on the back because we want to spend more in the front, and we don't have an endless pot of money. So how many leprechauns in town that I've found, that I think he started kind of understanding it. So like one of his statements, I think that was quoted in here about that it always costs something about that. It says it always costs more to selectively demolish than it does to do new construction. That's totally not true. And I think he was saying that before.
It would
he kind
be
of
more
understood
cost effective to renovate
Yeah.
the existing non-historic addition or to construct a new addition.
So it's not always the case.
Right.
You have to do a lot before you get that tipping point, but I
Right.
think that's what he was wary about all along. It's like, you gotta just watch it. Like, you can't say, hey, while we're at it, we'll do this, and while we're at it, we'll do 3 more things. By the time it's like spending a lot on an older car. Like, you get to the point where it doesn't make any more sense.
Right.
You don't spend $10,000 on a $5,000 car versus just go get a new one. So his point was well taken, but I think it's just, it was a nuanced conversation back and forth, but it seemed like towards the end, he was feeling like in agreement that it's something that could be explored is just take that addition as far down as you can, where you can totally expose the structure and the foundation and see, hey, if that looks good, then continue in that direction and build back up from there, and you're already grandfathered by zoning. But if you get down there and you find that there's a lot of cracks you just didn't see, then you gotta change plans.
Right, so my layman's way of thinking about this is not that we can't use any of it, meaning the foundation. I think of foundation as everything my feet, anything under my feet, that's foundation to me. And I think where we got was, if we take off the walls and the stuff above my feet, that's the part that is most cost effective to, and most,
That's where you run the big risk. Like, and that's what his point was, I think, on
Right.
some of it. It's like, if you try to keep the walls and by the time you change 5 windows to new places to fit a new layout,
Right.
you run the risk of getting to the point where it's cheaper to just knock it all down and build up cheaper new 2x6 construction, so.
But that there's not that it seems from his assessment that it is reasonable to think that the foundation, the part beneath our feet, is probably, or there's good likelihood that it's in good enough shape that putting up new walls and putting up a new above our feet would be supportable.
Part of it's a little bit shaded, I think, by, I think he really feels strongly about trying to do something, I can't say I would disagree, but like, it probably wouldn't prioritize it as much, but I think he wants to make something more figural, more aesthetically pleasing than just a box in the back. And that's basically what it is, so that's kind of,
But he wants to
Yeah.
not keep the roof, I think, as well.
yeah.
He wants to change up the roofing, but
Right.
He was agreeing, yeah, just basically start up from the floor level and then new
Right.
walls, new roof.
so what he did from that conversation is he, just on his own, probably because he was wanting to demonstrate that he was hearing what he said, is he came up with two drawings that are included in your packet. They are fold out. And Barb, do you have them both, or you just have the one? Okay, so the first option would keep the front addition and then, basically keep the footprint as we have.
Is that option one?
That would be option 1A, yes.
1A,
1A,
so the first fold out.
yeah. The first
Okay, but on the back, on the costing, we have 3. Option.
Those
Oh,
are,
that's
Oh, those are the old ones.
That's the old one.
I'm sorry.
So,
Okay.
he didn't
Um,
cost this, and he didn't even charge for this. He followed in the very age-old bad habit of architects of wanting to see a project get somewhere and doing it for free. So, he-
Okay.
so we were not able, because what our conversation, the direction that Wiedemann is suggesting that we need to go is different from what we discussed last time. We discussed, hey, let's keep the back shell and move forward. Because that seems to be the less prudent way to go, we were not able to get cost estimates because we needed to have a discussion. Oh, we really shouldn't use the back shell. Let's, we had to come back. So we don't have updated numbers. So what we have, though, is a way of keeping the rear foundation and reconfiguring the back. And we just have to decide basically whether to take off the front addition or keep it.
It's either A or B, right?
he would start from A or B,
would
like if he
start-
gets further
right.
feedback.
Right, so I would like, and again, I don't have a vote, but I just want to put this out there. I think because I think it's not prudent to keep the walls in the rear addition. As a result, it's going to be more expensive than we would like, or more expensive than it would be if we were able to keep the back walls.
Which are the earlier estimates, right?
Well, it would be kind of like the earlier estimate. So
Yeah,
in the
more
earlier
closer
estimate,
to it.
yeah, he had, it seemed a little high, but they were running like $1,300 a square foot to take down the addition in the back and replace it. So they were talking about like that plan is about 900 square feet. So I calculated that before, I can't remember what it was, but it was a pretty big number. But like even if you can get it down to like say 1,000, which is probably more reasonable, I think we could hope for 1,000 or less. That's 900,000. And they were talking about spending 900,000 in the historic chapel. So you're basically, it's like doing that's like 50-50. That's if you completely change out the addition, including the foundation. You'd be spending half your budget on the building in the front of house rooms where you celebrate things, and half on bathrooms and kitchens and storage rooms. So it's kind of, that's the thing
Which
we were
is the
trying
back.
we were trying to fix that before, to kind of say, hey, can we, take more off that end of the scale that's paying for the back and put it, keep it appropriately and well done for the future in the front, but don't don't overspend on utility buildings.
Which is why you were wanting to keep the back if we could and
Yeah.
rehabilitate the back walls.
Yes, and
But-
we could, but there are drawbacks to it. Like it's like this going this route 1A or 1B, it has like there's less chance of it taking more time. Like it could move successfully, where like you could do a variation on kind of like the sketch I did and still leave room for a back like accessory room, but then that runs the risk of we'd probably have to like leave it open to structural engineers come like rip all the drywall down, but then if you find out that hey, like there's a lot more of the takeaway than we hoped for, then we had to wait months for the drawings to kind of catch up and permits and everything else. So we could be putting things out of commission versus like moving forward with one of these two could make it faster.
In very simple terms, can somebody, could you, Steve, explain, or Joanna, could you explain the difference between A and B? I mean, I see shrubbery on B, I mean, but what's,
The difference between A and B is taking off the front addition.
okay,
And bathroom.
right,
And the
which are on
bathroom.
one,
No, the
on
bathroom-
A and not in B.
Well, so in A, one bathroom, they turned the two bathrooms into one so that it's handicap accessible and put a separate bathroom in the back. In
Right.
B, both of the bathrooms are in the back.
Okay,
And in B, you lose this backdoor access to the back area because there's a bathroom behind that door.
oh, I see.
But he
Okay.
moved it though. He moves it through the closet, up through the front. So
And
come
Can we,
a different way.
is there a compromise here that,
Okay, so that would be you'd lose the closet in order to get.
To get access off the
Yes,
side
we
room.
would not get that. Yes, we would not have that policy. Correct.
I mean, is there a plan where we do one and not the other, or, I mean, what are you thinking here? You who know more about this.
I think that we lose credibility in calling this a historic renovation if we leave the front bathroom, the front
I agree.
addition. I
And
think
I
that,
Getting funding would be easier if we take it back to the original design.
I think it gives us credibility in asking for historic preservation funding. But not only that, it also just mentally gives us credibility that we are bringing it back to its original. So,
So 1B,
so I think 1B
right,
is the way to go. Without a basement, I think that the fact that we're having to spend additional, or we're likely to have to spend additional for new exterior walls and roof and all that, I don't think a basement makes sense.
Well, the basement doesn't, you can't do the basement with 1B. It would have to be like a variant on 1B that's all new, where they completely rip it off and then do it in the same footprint. They do a new addition in the same footprint. And what Greg and Lindsay were trying to do was take the program we had worked on, my sketch, where it had a little bit more of like a breakout area where you could lay down food for an event, and so on and so forth. They were trying to jam all that in that existing shell. The side benefit of that is you can do that without needing to, although it could be a little hazy now, without needing a Garrett Park variance, because it's already existing 1 story, so you're keeping 1 story, and without the county needing a variance. There is a little bit of extra left on the lot from the zoning perspective for the county one, so that's one of the things in the memo also that was incorrect. There's about 26% buildable on the lot, and it's like 2250 something with this scenario in 1B. So you could still build something for like 350, but I
make a
think,
little bigger footprint.
yeah, bigger footprint or like a separate room tacked on, but like those options and the basement, they all really kind of rely, well, I guess not the extra room, but the basement relies on building new.
Well, it sounds like the basement is out, right? I mean,
I would
that's
like-
$1 million, which we need for the walls now.
Well, no, it's a couple hundred probably to do a basement, but the $1 million was underneath of this room.
Oh,
The difference for adding a basement on in the back, like if you had taken like option 1 and option 2 off of Axios, that was essentially the difference, is the addition was a little bit bigger, and that went from like 2.75 to 3.44, so it was probably like 300 grand in basement, and whatever the difference is,
No.
whatever the distance is, and making everything else bigger, so.
Well, And I would like to say that right now, do we even know that that foundation will meet code, or are we gonna find out later on that we're gonna have to do a new foundation?
So we asked, Barb and I asked 42 different ways. How can we be, what is there we could do that would help us to be certain that the foundation is what we need it to be to continue, to keep it in place and not have to replace it? And all those 42 ways were.
Because they haven't opened it up.
They
don't
haven't
know.
opened up. The
You can't
only way to
tell.
know
Right.
is to do that destructive.
So if we need that foundation, that's gonna be another several $100,000, no doubt.
Right, and if we were to attempt to keep the foundation and all the subflooring and all that stuff, and do the walls, and then they get in there and they discover that the foundation is insufficient, we have other things we need to discuss. You know, like at that point, I think we would need to come back and, you know,
And rebuild the whole thing.
and
Start
talk,
from scratch.
talk differently.
Shouldn't we then hire a consultant to come in now to do some of that work? I mean, rather than going down the road to find out, oh my God, later on, we got it. It won't.
I mean,
Barb's recommendation in the end was to, see if, get a structural engineer to do, is that correct, Barb? Like to do
Yeah, that's
some
correct.
investigation on it?
I mean, we could certainly engage a structural engineer. Obviously, our engineering firm would be able to recommend somebody, and the architect probably could as well. I think the one thing just to keep in mind is even if we hire a structural engineer, you never really know until you're in the midst of construction. There's always going to be the chance that there'll be something hidden or unforeseen.
Mhm.
So I think it would certainly perhaps provide some reassurance, but I certainly wouldn't want to sit here and tell you that reassurance should be 100%.
This is a new building and there's a lot of metaphorical bodies buried.
Yeah.
As long as the money's in the work over.
And I think the rear addition wasn't done to a very high standard either. I think it was just kind of a not very
Yeah, it was
extensive.
economical.
Yeah, it was more economical than structurally.
So, okay, so I don't know how to sequence the questions, but I guess what I would propose, and then we can jump off from there, is that we go with proposal 1B. There'll be some modifications. For example, I really dislike the water fountain where it is, and there are
Me
questions
too.
about what that could be.
Millions of people hate that code.
It is a requirement that there be a water fountain. What that means, there might be some room, some wiggle room. But, like little things that would be that we could, adjust from this. But the concept being keeping the foundation for the rear addition and doing all new walls, maintaining the footprint minus the front addition, taking the front addition out, having a second room, an auxiliary assembly room, but a second room where non-party participants can go and be quiet, and have a quiet space.
That's in the existing addition, yeah.
In the existing footprint,
right.
exactly. And that, I guess that we, I don't know about the structural engineer. I mean, yes, we could pay and try to get a better sense of the strength of the foundation, but if they check over in the northeast corner and the southwest corner, but nowhere else, then, we're not getting a true picture. We won't really know until we take everything down.
You may not need it if you're not going to try to keep a whole lot above head. I think where Greg was going, and I think it was in a good direction, was the idea would be like you would just plan on tearing everything down on the floor, and then once you get to that point, you've got the subfloor off, even you can see everything. And then right now, like the assessors and the Weedman folks, like they didn't see anything from the outside or the inside that gave an indication that foundation was faulty, but who knows, like by the time you tear it off, maybe you do find something. Probably not, but there's still a chance of it. But then at least then you've got everything exposed. You're not losing a ton of time if you've got to totally change gears and say, hey, well, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go the extra 2 steps and rip out the subfloor and rip out the foundation. And we need to, he would change his drawing from a renovation of it to a new without a ton of time, but it would just add that extra cost. So, be able to know then whether it's whether it's going to save you, a couple $100,000 or not.
So doing a structural engineer assessment at this point now, before anything else, would only give us a few extra months to think about, or help us make a decision about the foundation and whether to keep it a few months earlier. And it wouldn't, so, sorry, Phil, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I mean, I would rather have somebody come in and look and then find out, oh my God, we can't do this, even with a short inspection, than to wait, because the thing is this could be, what, 20% of the couple $100,000, basically 20% of the project cost if we have to put a new foundation in. And
But
that's
what
kind
would be the benefit? I mean, what would that mean, though? So if we found out that the foundation is bad, but from a structural engineer, does that mean that we wouldn't undertake any renovation of the back?
No, it just means that.
We would have enough information to make a better judgment, right?
Exactly.
Actually, I may have made a mistake on what I said earlier, because I think if you do tear it all down and then we demand and the structural engineer, they stand there and they say, well, we really feel it's better to just go ahead and rip that out and start over, then I don't think we can go back and put a new foundation to the plan he has on 1B. He had to make a new plan that falls within the setbacks, which means a thinner addition that goes back further or has less area to stay at the back wall it is now. Because right now it's
Oh, out of compliance.
it's out of compliance. Like there's a 30-foot like width you can build in, and that thing's probably like 36.
No, once we do renovation, once we make a change, we kind of.
You can't build new construction. It would be considered new construction, and you can't. And then where I was saying it's hazy earlier too is the county's trying to clamp down on the idea. Like a lot of developers do this now. They say they're going to renovate something, and then they get most of the way through, then they're just like, oh, they just throw the rest of the first floor in the dumpster, and they have a platform to work on, and then they build up new custom construction from there. The county's trying to change that, where if you're going to go that far, they're going to make you treat it like it's new.
They did that on the house in Montreux.
Yeah.
So, but we're assuming we want to do this. I just want to throw in that prices are going up, as might have been anticipated, and no doubt will continue to if the foundation is flawed and we have to spend on that. And the public was very mixed about wanting to do this to begin with.
Wanting to do anything?
I think they were. I think that's how we
I
interpret
did
it.
not get that perspective at all.
Me neither.
I don't think so
Me
either.
I think that perspective, a lot of people wanted to do something. I think there was a lot of sticker shock about spending multiple millions of dollars, and that's
Right.
been the goal, is to try to, like, if it's a $3 million plus thing, then no. I think 2 is even a maybe for me personally, because I would just worry about, like, we don't know where we're going to be with needing to do stormwater, and I wouldn't want to sentence my kids to having the rest of their growing up years with no change to the parks versus having $1 million addition to the back of here. I'm
And
sure a lot of
tax
other
increase.
families would share that opinion. So,
So,
or trying to avoid a tax increase.
I
but-
thought the premise of this was we were trying to come up with a design that would allow Barb to put in some proposals for funding. And that's what we were trying to do.
so that's part of,
And that was part of our time constraint, to do
Yes.
this quickly.
kind
Now,
of.
if we go
yes.
do an engineer and open up the foundation, do we then get off that track? Because I don't want to jeopardize that.
So,
You could do that with 1B though, right? I think, isn't that possible?
well, no,
Barbara,
the
do you want to-
structural engineer, if we were to do, I just don't, I mean,
Yeah, if
maybe
we
I'm
do-
dense, I just don't know the benefit of having the structural engineer come out, because I don't know that it would change anything at this point.
Well, yeah, so that is the question I have. If the structural engineer said, no, the foundation's not in great shape, what would we do at that point?
We would-
we?
Have to
Build a building.
design a building that included a new foundation.
Right, so that's the one thing we've discussed, is just building a whole new foundation and building a new addition. Is there any other option? Is there a
Don't do the
option
rear.
of you get that structural engineer's opinion and then you actually don't do a renovation that?
So we just leave everything as is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking.
Yeah, no,
Because otherwise I don't see the benefit of getting the structural engineer.
And I think it's a time
Why
issue
not wait
too.
till that later
We can
time?
leave the rear alone and do the front, and the main impetus for this was within the structure, right? and then we added the rear and the front. So maybe we could leave the rear, do the structure here, make the changes, and do the front renovation.
Okay, so here's an idea that, that Steve raised with me, and that is, what if we change the scope? What if we focus on the front? We focus on the historic part, which would be the stage, the parlor, the front addition, and we make these great. We get rid of the front addition and we move the bathrooms to the back area where the closets are, the very back part with the glass doors, so that we have ADA compliant bathrooms.
And what about the warming kitchen?
Mayor.
And we keep the kitchen as is, we don't do anything, nothing beyond the parlor.
I think a thought that's been going through my mind, and I'm flashing back to the work session where you, in August of 2022, where you talked about what your goals were for renovating this building. And one of the first things that came up was your desire to make this building code compliant. I do feel compelled, I'm not trying to sway you, but compelled to remind you that the rear addition is not code compliant. And so, please just.
But it's not code compliant because of the roof height, is that correct? The ceiling
No.
height?
It's a variety of
The
things.
only thing that's not compliant is that the kitchen is not code compliant, but if you don't, well, you do run the risk if you do a lot of renovation, you have to do it all. The thing that's not code compliant is the entrance and all the entrances.
It
and
was
the bathrooms.
ceiling height, like I can pull it up, it
No,
was
the
in the
ceiling height
packet
is
last
not-
time.
The ceiling height is compliant, and
I don't-
Wiedemann was in error on that one.
I mean, what do we lose if we just leave the back alone? I
if
mean,
we-
assuming we can comply, which was only 400,000, right? That was the option 0 that wasn't in the survey, which would have definitively told us what people really wanted.
So if we focused on the historic part, got rid of the front addition, put the bathrooms in the back, just sort of put them in the back, found a place to put them in the back, and so that we were compliant in that respect, and we did something with the kitchen so that it was not possible to use it in a non-compliant way. What we could do then is do a sort of plan for a second phase to think about altering the back and fundraise for that, or start to come up with plans and sort of plan ahead for how to pay for that. Barb, I don't know, Steve, I don't know how to, the ceiling height thing, I hear what you're both saying.
I just don't think that's a very attractive option. I'm just gonna say it.
Okay, to do like
I
two
agree.
phases?
Yeah, piecemealing it. I mean, I think, I don't know. I think you all know, I very much value our historic resources in town and preserving them. But if I had to guess, I think most people would prefer to invest in updating the kitchen than restoring the front facade. And we didn't ask that question in the survey, but I think if we said we're going to restore the front facade and leave the old kitchen, most people would be, what? Why are you bothering?
In a short term, I mean, if it were presented as this is the first phase and
5 years later with more funding, then go potentially with more funding to just build a whole new addition,
But
you would
look
take
how
out
long
that
it took
question.
us to get to this point.
Right,
I
but
just think if we're
that's
going to
true.
do it, let's do it in one fell swoop.
Yeah,
okay?
I think the
Yeah.
trouble is though
Fundraising
that
now.
even if all goes well and we feel like 1B can move forward, like you're pushing 2 million by the time you do. That's what's hopeful that Axios's numbers were abundantly cautioned.
And they're very conservative.
Yeah, they're very
It's
conservative.
very
but,
much.
like even if you bring that down and like the foundation turns out to be usable and you redo that, do it like 1B, get a new kitchen, get a new bathrooms back there and everything, it's like 2 million and we have 1.25. So there's like 0.75 to do. I'm just leery of just overspending on this thing for how much use it gets. I mean, I think there's a segment of town that feels like it's vital and it's an everyday thing, but to a lot of people, it's less important.
Including the people we didn't survey, because those tend to be the ones who don't answer for a reason, which is that they're new here, not around.
We surveyed, they didn't respond.
Yeah.
We went to
Yes,
every single house.
That's
so
what I
we
mean.
surveyed.
But I'm saying the non-response rate, I'm sure patterned.
Somewhat,
It
yeah,
would
but
be logical.
I heard some on the other side where just anecdotally where a friend like said that like their family chose not to put one in even though they're kind of abundant users of this place because they felt like they wanted to hear what the next generations thought. Well, it was a noble thing that they said, but they said they should have put input in anyway. But so there's probably a little bit of both. But I was surprised just to hear, just anecdotally also, like how many people just don't come here. It's just not something that they need.
I think we would have a much better feel for what we want to undertake and what we can afford to undertake once we know what funding sources are available. And I thought the whole exercise of this was to come up in a timely way with being able to get Barb to make some grant proposals to see if we can get some funding from the state and the county.
Okay, so let's play this out. Funding from the state,
Joanna, may I add?
please.
I wanted to kind of just tag on to what Lisa said, if I may. My recommendation to you all is to give some thought to what is a reasonably scoped project that you believe would serve the community well in the long term, and kind of try to agree on that tonight. Basically, we take a shot at getting state funding. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that there's going to be a lot of competition. The state obviously is not in the same financial condition as it was, when they had, lots of COVID money sitting there. I think if we will know probably within a matter, we will know by the middle of April, basically, whether we are successful in getting any funding from the state as a legislative bond bill initiative. Obviously, during that intervening time, Kayla and I will continue looking for other possible sources of funding. But if we are unsuccessful at the state level, this is a conversation you're going to have to totally revisit anyway.
Right.
But I feel like you're getting very caught up ahead of yourselves trying to think through every eventuality, when I think the very short-term decision point is, what is the scale of the project that you would like me to submit as a legislative bond bill initiative for funding? Because what we need to do is to be able to say, here's our project, here's our funding. They're looking for a funding gap that they can help with. They're not saying that we have all the answers, but that there's at least something somewhat concrete and identifiable. I'm not trying to cut short your discussion, please know that, but I'm just saying that window of time for you all to make a decision of that scale is rapidly
And
closing.
do you know the scope, what's the maximum they'll fund?
Joanna and I had a meeting last year with Delegate Solomon, who sits on appropriations. Joanna and I had a meeting in October, Joanna, I think it was, with the entire state delegation.
And then we also talked with a representative from the governor's office.
How much will they fund?
So basically the way, no one knows at this point. So the governor will basically, obviously, they're already working on their budget. So I think getting any funding through the governor's office realm is pretty much non-existent for a variety of reasons. It's not clear at this point what pot of money will be available for legislative bond bill initiatives. And we also don't know how many other people are going to be putting in for projects. So all those things are major unknowns. And my discussion, with Delegate Solomon, who certainly seems to be, and the rest of the delegation, when I looked back through other projects that have received bond bill funding, and these are grants, so please don't get, misconstrue the word bond in this context. Those that probably, got anything $1 million or over are going to be things like the Baltimore Museum of Art and things like that. What we talked to the delegation about was probably putting in a request maximum of $750,000, recognizing that the actual award would likely be less than that. There's obviously a lot of unknowns. I'm just, I guess, trying to somewhat guide you to what is a reasonably scaled project, at least, that we can take something forward on, recognizing that if those efforts fall short, there's a whole different level of discussion you are going to have.
And Steve just gave us the ballpark, right, about saying we have 1.25 million,
my guess,
to something. It sounds like most of the shortfall for the phase one could be taken up by this kind of grant, but that's about the limit of it?
The 2 million, I was just guessing, like 900 for the front, 900 for the back, and then 200 outside. That comes to like 2 million, but that 750, if we got it all, that would probably, with our existing funding, put us in good shape. I wonder
we're
if
not going to get 750.
No, we're not. So to that point, like, is there any? Is it unwise to ask for ask for funding of 1.25 and hope we get a higher percentage of 1.25 than a lower percentage of 750?
Guys, I think we'd be lucky if we get 250.
I would
So-
agree, 'cause there's so many
but-
other
okay,
things around.
So Barb's recommendation, Barb sort of trying to rein us in a little bit.
Mhm.
I look at option 1B, and aside from a few interior things, this is programmatically, I think this is appropriate for what we use town hall for. I think that it serves, maybe not every single one of our needs, but most of our needs,
And the future,
and the future.
which I think is really important.
It's not extravagant. We're doing our best to keep an old foundation if we can, you know. If we can't, then we got other things we need to think about. But we're trying to do, I think this is the minimum that minimum or maximum, I'm not quite sure which, but I think this is what we can do. I think this is our best option to pursue.
And if we don't have the funding, we don't have to start construction. I mean, you know, we have options.
Right, but if,
I think
right,
knowing where we are with funding is gonna make a big difference on what our
Yeah.
decisions
Right.
are for scope and
Right, but
design.
we could use 1B as the basis for requesting
Correct.
state funding. Once we get an answer there, we can revisit the design based
Correct.
on
Right.
the funding.
Yeah, they change
On the
all
other
the time
hand-
from concept to
Yeah.
final, so
Mhm.
the agencies would be none surprised if we had to change it. And like even the thing Phil was suggesting, get the structural engineer to look at it, it may not be that time sensitive to do it if this goes out for the funding checks in January through Barb, and if the structural engineer can look at it in Q1, we might know, hey, by the time answers are coming in, we'll know, hey, they see a major indicator that we're going to need to fall within our zoning parameters, then we may just have to change. So.
But even if some benefactor said, here's $5 million, I don't know if we would need that. I think that what we see in 1B, I think it's proportionate to what we need.
I agree.
And even if we had all the money in the world, I don't think we need, well, I mean, we could of course use more, but I don't think we need more. And I think that this would be I think that this would serve our town.
I agree. I mean, I think it's a good $2 million-ish if my guess is close. Whereas 3 million, I feel is like just extravagant. As much as it would be nice to get some of those other things, like there's a lot of other needs around town.
So what do you all think of telling Wiedemann that 1B is our fourth option? This is the one that we want them to do cost estimates for. And then bring it back to us so that we can then pass it on to the state and say, can we have some money?
Bill wants to get in.
Yeah, Phil.
I'm fine with that. The only thing I would temper it with slightly is that I think that we could move some walls and interior walls if necessary, especially with regard to things like the drinking fountain, maybe some other.
What? I'm sorry, I missed that. The what?
The drinking fountain.
Oh, yeah, no, I would love to put the drinking fountain.
Yeah, I'd like to open up the kitchen.
Yeah, the drinking fountain, let's put it in the assembly room or something, you know, like. I
But
agree.
what I'm saying here is that we can move interior walls later. I agree with the approach that what we should do is take this, get Wiedemann to formalize it sufficiently that we can send it over to the state in hopes of getting a bond bill. And in the interim, we can work out the nuances of what we want to do inside and moving stuff around.
I
Yeah,
agree.
We would know the cost range. Yeah, we could figure out the details later. We would know within, say, 100,000 of where we think it's going to be.
So Todd,
Exactly.
I've heard 4 people say that option 1B is a good thing that we can live with, that would serve our needs. I would like to hear what you can, with your mic.
It seems more attentive to public, some of the public restraint and limitations for support than some of the other bigger plans that we had. And I personally, I'm not sure I would do this, but I know I'm from a different generation and I haven't used this building except for these meetings. And I know you've been working on this for some time, or at least some people have. So, I mean, it doesn't thrill me, but I'm gonna lose anyway. So, I mean, I'm trying to decide whether to take a principled stand of opposition or whether to just go along. I mean, I'm sort of on the cusp.
Would you like to abstain?
Well, if
I
you think of
mean-
it one way, Todd, we're putting this option forward to get us through the phase of requesting state funding. And then we do have to revisit things at that point.
Well-
I do question, do we want Wiedemann to invest a lot of time and effort? What level of detail do we need for the bond bill application? My memory of bond bill applications past is you don't need great design detail for that.
You don't need a lot of design detail. Essentially, you need to be able to describe your project and have some reasonable basis for what you're saying your project will cost as substantiation for what you're requesting for
Right, so you
funding.
need them to do the cost estimate for that purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can certainly just go back through Wiedemann and Axios. I think we'd probably want them to sort of look at the latest plan, and obviously the problem with the cost estimates they gave for the original option 3 is it had elements such as a basement, it had some other things that, like a commercial kitchen, that you have decided you don't want to move
Right,
forward
right.
with. So my thought would be to see what is the most cost-effective way of getting them to sort of back those things out. I mean, I started looking at it, but candidly, it's not my work, and there's pages and pages and pages. Ask them to back those elements out of the project and at least give us a fairly reasonable sense of what we're looking at now.
And I think the big questions they were asking were, they wanted us to know for certain, do we want to try to keep the rear foundation?
And if possible, the answer is yes.
Yes.
Correct. Do we want to keep the walls? The answer is, let's not. Do we want a basement? No. Do we want the front addition? No. Like, I think with those elements, that's what they needed us to, they
Right.
need for us to decide.
Just to finish my statement, if
Yes,
I may, I do believe, as Jerry says, we're doing this estimate to see if we can get grant money. Indeed, that's a good idea. We should definitely do that. However, the downside of doing this is that there's a path dependence. Once you start down this path, it's harder to leave as you go. And I think we're all starting to see that. And I think some of us saw it back in August. And I think the more into this, the more invested we are, the more likely it's going to happen. And when the foundation turns out unviable and we have to throw in another $1 million, I mean, it's going to become an issue. I think we should proceed and see if we can get grants and if they'll help us. I think I'm going to defer whether I dissent or not for later when it comes down to seeing what we are planning to actually do. I admire the fact that you guys have this mission. I like the idea of historic renovation. I would also like to add the PV here.
The what?
I mean, the photovoltaics and as solar panels, that's an extra
Well, that's
300,000.
always
That can be
something you
done
can
later.
add
Right, we
later.
already have a cost estimate for those as an option.
Right. I mean, I might ultimately, but as you said, with the phasing of this, we need to do it. If we don't do it now, the certainty that it will happen is less. So you guys don't need my vote, but if you were to get it, I might roll it in with getting the PV, okay? Because that's what you have to do.
Yeah,
And also, I think having a generator for a warming space and.
yeah. My suggestion, and I want to make sure, I mean, they haven't published the deadline for filing, but it's going to be coming up in probably less than 45 days. That's pretty much a given. And I've already been asked by the delegate Solomon's office to provide them a 1-paragraph description of our project so that he can start mulling things over with what he's got, what's coming from the other local governments. I would suggest, just for the purpose of the bond bill, just knowing kind of where we are financially, is that we discuss removing the non-historic front addition. We talk about the issues with the rear addition. Let's see if we can get through ADA compliance. Let's see if we can kind of get through those hurdles.
Okay.
Assuming that we're successful, there's still other elements of this project we'll need to talk about, but I would always say that when you go out to bid and you're not really sure, I mean, Lisa knows this very well from her own projects, and Stephen does from his professional life. I think some of these things that would certainly be, very nice to have, but may not, it's the difference between wants and needs.
Yes.
When we actually, if we are able to move forward and we know we have a funded project, those are things that could be included as bid alternates. so that you could actually see if we, when and if we get to that point, what is the cost of the base project you want to see? What are the things you'd like to have? And then we can assess whether we can actually afford them when it's all said and done, would be my recommendation to you all. But as Todd was saying, we've got a long ways to go before we're drafting construction documents.
But there's certainly a consensus to move forward on Plan 1B to get funding.
Yes, but I actually think that this is, of our chance, I think this is a good project. I don't, maybe I shouldn't look to give horse in the mouth, but like, I don't want to think of this as just, well, this is okay, let's take this to get funding. I think this is actually a good plan, and assuming that it's not $1 jillion, you know, that we do think of this as what we take to go forward.
Well, I still think it needs some refinement.
Well, yeah, sure.
Either way, we're
Yeah.
going forward, so let's do it.
Sure, yeah, I mean, I wasn't suggesting it wasn't our plan.
Okay.
I'm just saying that if you find that we can't get any state money, we're going to have to revisit our decisions.
Correct.
That's all I'm saying. Yes.
Correct.
And I
Some of
also
it's
think,
gonna-
Good
Some
idea.
of it's gonna change. I mean, they drew this for free, so they probably just drew this quickly. They weren't gonna work out every nook and cranny of it. They're gonna, when they go forward with this plan, they're probably gonna find some things that they can massage and make a little bit.
But we're not ready to
Better,
get
so.
working drawing.
no, we're not, and we're not asking to do that.
Right.
But
That's
we're
next
getting
step.
closer. Okay,
Minimal is
Question.
cost us.
so are we,
Do you have a question,
A
Steve?
question for Barb. So assuming this goes out to try to get information on possible sources of funding in June, like when do we find out answers on that? Will we know by the time we're going through the next budget to be able to kind of react to it in that, or is it going to be after that?
It's going to be a little bit of a challenge because obviously the legislature doesn't, is in session until mid-April. Typically, you've adopted your budget by then. You know, just because we usually try to get the budget adopted before the election, so we don't have someone newly elected kind of confronted with that. So I think on the legislative bond bill, I think we'll have a read before the legislature concludes. I think we'll be seeing how those projects are moving forward or not moving forward.
So when will that be, Barb?
before,
Roughly?
probably early.
It's going to move fairly quickly. So like I say, they haven't published the calendar for it, but I've never seen it go later than the first couple of days of February. As I say, the legislature has to include things as part of their budget. And then obviously the governor has to sign off on things.
So is that for the submission or the answer?
That is a submission, but the
Okay.
answer will probably follow less than 60 days after that.
Yeah.
So April.
Or,
We'll have an indication because it will be part of the budget that's in the process of being adopted.
Okay, that's helpful.
Will probably be a hearing, the mayor will need to testify, et cetera, et cetera.
They've actually simplified it a
Oh, they
lot.
have?
Yeah, most recently, they have not been, yeah, it used to be, Jerry Lee's alluding to this, where everyone would show up generally on a Saturday and come and basically make your pitch. It's much simpler now.
Oh, great.
So I don't think we'll need to do that.
okay, so all those in favor of sending option 1B to Wiedemann for cost estimate and a little bit more refined drawings, and then using that as the basis for applying for grants?
Second.
Okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, I can't make the motion.
I'll make the motion as stated by the mayor.
Okay, so,
Seconded.
okay, those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, wonderful.
Hooray.
Yay, okay.
Okay.
The time is 9:24, and moving on to
It's inevitable.
new business.
It's pretty close to time.
Don't jinx us. I've done that before.
I'm impressed.
It's me.
Town Manager Matthews.
I'll make it easy. So this is for discussion purposes only. We have experienced during my tenure, I believe before that, repeated challenges with residents understanding that a town permit is required in addition to a Montgomery County permit. I discussed this idea with Joanna, who green-lighted me to talk to Ron Bolt about it. And not necessarily about building permits, but several of the jurisdictions I've worked for in Maryland have adopted ordinances during my tenure that require disclosure of certain provisions unique to their jurisdiction. So in Tacoma Park, it was about their urban forestry provisions. In Westminster, it had to do with some rental housing provisions. So basically, the ordinance that I asked Ron Bolt to draft, so you had at least something to look at in talking about this, is it's a ordinance just strictly for discussion purposes once again, that would require disclosure as part of a real estate disclosure that the town of Garrett Park has regulations. The disclosure would be have to be issued in conjunction with the sale of real property within the boundaries of the town. So does it mean that we would never have another problem again in permitting? Possibly no, because many of the issues that I've run into are actually people who've lived here for decades in some cases. But at least this would be an effort to have anyone new moving into the town when they're purchasing a home, receive a real estate disclosure, basically indicating that there are certain Garrett Park regulations separate and apart from the county, and that when they would need to obtain both a town building permit as well as a county building permit. So it's essentially trying to give someone a heads up when they're purchasing property, hopefully with the goal, hopefully of just avoiding problems on the permitting front that we've seen.
So I'm a big fan of the concept of trying to make sure that residents know that we are a government and that there are certain rules that they need to be aware of and all that kind of stuff. I talked with a realtor in town who wasn't super excited about the concept of doing this because there are so many disclosures as it is, right? That there's concern that, you're just adding on to it.
Yeah.
And one thing that was pointed out was there are probably, and I know this because Ron Bolt mentioned, there are other municipalities who are also trying to tackle this issue and also wanting disclosures. And I think that I'm glad that we're raising this. I'm glad that we're talking about this. I think that there might be other avenues for this. I believe one of the Cherry Chases was in communication with the County Realtors Association. And I think there's something to be done here, and I don't want to say, no, let's not consider this ordinance. I just think that we should think about other ways to also achieve our goal. Maybe there's a notification from realtors to the town saying, hey, there's a new resident, why don't you get a welcome package together? And because I think historically there's been sort of a welcome wagon thing, wasn't there? Did the Women's Association have like a welcome? And so I support, and I was one of the early ones. I think Barb and I came up with the idea at the same time of how can we get residents to know that we have rules that you guys need to apply for permits and things like that. So I want us to talk about it. I don't know how I feel about the ordinance itself.
Okay.
You want to talk about it now?
You're welcome to. I'm gonna.
No. I mean, one question that I had, Barb, is if they don't do it, is there a penalty?
If who doesn't do?
If there isn't a disclosure that happens for a sale, and whoever is supposed to, the seller doesn't do it to the new owner, is there a penalty? What happens if they don't do
As
it?
currently drafted, there's not.
I noticed.
There probably, yeah, I mean, I will.
Hence my question, right?
I can talk to Ron Bolt about that. I would say I have lived in both the boundaries of the Reston Association and currently the Columbia Association. I am certainly, the obligation is on me as a seller to ensure that a disclosure packet is given. It's not my real estate agent. It's ultimately my responsibility to ensure that my real estate agent does it. So currently there is no penalty. I don't know, Lisa, if you're suggesting that one be added or not. Generally in the other jurisdictions, we didn't really encounter that problem, I will say.
Okay.
I mean, they're required to submit.
Right.
It's part of the closing, right?
Correct.
So we're just sneaking another sheet in there.
Right.
And you're right, there's 30 or 40 clean water, but one more is not a big deal. There's already 30, so you just initial one more.
But
And it does, and if you do it, if you wait for the welcome wagon or whatever, then they've already, they were not informed before they purchased. We want them informed at the time of purchase, right?
I mean, it should be informed before purchase, I would think.
Sorry?
I would think you should inform before purchase And because there's no penalty, you could ignore this, and yeah, somebody might yell at you, but that's about as far as it go. I mean, the homeowner would find out the long way.
So maybe the solution is to schmooze with any realtors who do business in town so that they are informed and educated about, you know, you're doing your residents a disservice by not letting them know that there's a limitation on how big or, you know,
But-
they can't just tear down the house. No, but I'm just saying, like, if the goal is to make sure that people who buy know that, you know, you're buying this house and you're seeing that you're thinking you can tear it down because you think the county allows you to tear it down and put on some cute, you know, something that with 30% coverage, like, nope, sorry, you get 20, you get 18.
Yeah, but
You know, like, it's a disservice, so maybe it's a schmoozing thing with realtors so that they are more upfront with, I don't know.
they don't want to schmooze that way. They only want to schmooze in ways that sell the house,
Yeah,
not the ones
I hear
I
that
don't want to push
raised
away
out.
buyers. But it is
I
Yeah.
don't see a downside to doing this before and also doing the welcome kit. To me, there's no downside to requiring the disclosure. Sure, realtors are always gonna say, please don't give us one more thing to do, but that's not our problem. You know, it really is something that we should do what we can to inform homeowners in advance. And I think in a particular subset of those are the ones who are flippers, who really, you know, aren't moving here, but would really want to know what they're facing in terms of building permit requirements.
It's ironic that there were 2 houses flipped where it was obvious that the flipper never looked at things and was caught totally unawares. And we were,
Exactly, yeah.
the land use committee and I, we were like stupefied, like, how do you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and not even look into what the zoning is? Like, it's just, we're just
I did
shocked.
want to make another suggestion. If we do decide to pursue this, I'd like to add language about the arboretum and the town trees and protection of town trees.
Yeah, I
Take
actually
that opportunity.
mentioned that to Ron Bolt.
Composting?
Well, I think Ron Bolt and I talked about that because of the discussions that the committee has been having. You know, the point he raised, he said he'd be happy to add whatever we wanted, obviously. You know, the more you're adding to the disclosure, and he, on the tree part, he asked if there's some other way of doing it, but I certainly don't want someone moving in and thinking they can hack down a town tree in front
Yeah,
of
I mean,
their
I think
house.
we could keep it light and just allude to.
Right,
where they
that
get
there is a,
information.
okay.
But I'd like to do a little more research about efforts of the other municipalities, because if we're all working together to try to get language in the disclosure piles, the piles of disclosures, and it's easier if we're working together on that.
And I would agree, in talking with maybe even the same person, the suggestion was made that we basically go with the Realtors Association, have it put in a paragraph put in the closing papers, which says something to the effect of, you know, the town you're about to buy in has it in, fill in the blank, has its own regulations you need to be aware of, or however that might work.
Yeah, that's exactly what the ordinance would do, is that it would be
I would read that
included in
paper as a buyer. We don't care about the realtors, we care about the buyers, really. The realtors are there anyway, I mean, right?
It's not as scary as it might seem to some people, like the regulations we have, but you could be caught unawares. Like
Yeah.
we had so much fear put into us when we bought our house in 2009. The realtor then was not somebody who normally works here a lot, but he was like, oh, they have all these regulations. You really ought to talk to somebody that's really out of the ordinary. But I found it wasn't that bad. So, but it would be good for people to know that maybe just don't even look.
So do we want to introduce this ordinance, or do we want to just?
Well, Joanna,
Sure.
were you earlier recommending that the town office staff collect more information about other
Yeah, I think it'd be
types of
easy.
disclosures happening elsewhere?
Yeah,
And then we revisit this one more time before we introduce it? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, I know when I approached Ron Bolt about this, he represents a number of the small municipalities, and the town of Chevy Chase, I think, has a similar idea. You know, I don't think there'd be a situation where you'd have a common disclosure because everybody has different regulations. So,
Right.
Except that, but it could be, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be that our language needs to say you can only have 18% of lot coverage. You know, like, we don't need to be specific to that extent, but rather just say that there are building and art and
Zoning,
tree
permitting.
things.
Right.
It's
And
all
that's-
available on the town website.
Right.
Just
And
so,
that they
like,
should look them up.
So it could be that there is common enough language in a disclosure that would work, but yeah, yes, Garrett, I think I would like to see, and to see which, in the town of Chevy Chase, how far along they are in communication with the county, or with the county realtors.
Sure, I can check
Yeah.
with Todd Hoffman. Okay.
So then that's good, we can, we sort of raise that as a thing to discuss. The time is 9:36. Town updates. Councilmember Paskowski, you have loaded us up with things that you wanted to.
Yes, some off-the-wall things, like some of them are a little bit overdue, because I've been bugged by various ladies on my block where I live for three of them, actually. So the first one, the Strathmore Avenue light pole holiday decorations, this is something a neighbor of mine has brought up. I think she had a great idea about this. She's brought it up multiple times, wondering why she drives through a lot of other towns and sees they have lampposts and they have holiday decorations, and we don't. We just look the same all year round. So I think it was a great question. So I'd be kind of curious, just general sense of the town government and town management, like, is it something that we feel could be looked into to kind of see if there's enough interest beyond just the one neighbor and myself who think it's a good idea.
Would they light up?
That would be the idea. I think she was thinking like it could be
Something
wreaths or wraps on them. It could be like maybe some Christmas things, some Hanukkah things, and then mix them around, and then I think have lights on it too. I'm not sure how that would work. I mean, Phil might know if you could tap off the light, but I think the thinking was to see, like, is it something that there's enough people that feel like it's a good idea, to see if there's then interest to have a committee started to figure out what it would be, what it would cost, who's going to put them up, which I'm assuming would be George and Frank on ladders putting them up, and then where to store it, which we don't have any space, but we may be able to solve that thing. But a lot of those things could be worked out later. But if there's kind of a positive feeling about adding that, and could just also be on the Waverly ones that we have coming too. So it might be a couple of key spots in town where it would kind of be of a holiday experience. But
Is there a process or anything like that for consideration, this kind of thing? Has this ever been done? I don't know if it's been done.
have you heard of it, Phil?
Oh, yeah, because I visited vendors the last time, well, it's been a few years, but the last time I was at MML, I'm sorry, not MML, yeah, it was the state Maryland Municipal League, and Mosca is one that still sends me a bunch of ads. So, I mean, there's vendors out there who will do anything from flags to lit decorations. They'll put them up, take them down, or you can do them yourself, however you want. I mean, it's...
But Garrett Park
sure.
has never done it before.
Right, but as
You
long
do
as...
it-
I don't
We have people
remember
who
it.
lived here 30 years,
33 years.
33 years.
They've never had,
We've never had-
everybody does
But our
house
lamps are
decorations
beautiful.
and we give awards, which is great, but.
That's really nice.
So, I wouldn't even know, Barb, is there anything that you can think of that would be precedent for us for like making a decision about this, or a process that is already in place that we could piggyback off of, or are we starting from scratch?
I would suggest at this point, if it's something that the group is interested in, just provide that direction, and I can, do some exploring and come back with some more information for you.
We're not talking about for this year.
No, obviously not. That's what my neighbor was disappointed. Like, are we getting decorations this year? I said, well, not in 6 weeks, no. So I promised I would bring it up here. Well, this is a couple of weeks ago. I talked to her, but I wonder if it might help, like if maybe we don't need to like commit one way or the other to it, but if the Bugle is mentioning it, hint, like if residents that might have an interest might be able to contact the town office, and we might find, hey, there are 2 people or 22 or 42 or whatever, maybe that would help to kind of find out if there are people that are willing to put forth some effort on it. Just a thought. Because I can't take
idea
all
of
of
doing
it.
it on
Reasonable to
Waverly.
explore it, and we're just talking about Strathmore
Or Waverly,
potentially
too.
Waverly.
Waverly would be cool, like the,
What about not having lights, which are expensive, but having fluffy
Reese. Yeah.
wreaths and things? Wreaths are very
Yeah, if you see it, I think it'll be
consistent
fine.
with our theme and our
Yeah.
old-fashioned lighting.
I was just gonna say, there seems to be
Yeah.
some general interest in doing something, and obviously we've got quite a long lead time. Why don't I talk to George in the morning and, just ask him as time permits to sort of look into what would be, what might be some options that would be attractive but not overly burdensome from a maintenance, operational standpoint or a storage standpoint. And we'll just make sure that we, have some idea to take into account when we're putting together the budget for next year. So
Because
you
what
all
we
can
may find
consider it.
out, what we may find out is what would be not burdensome would be, I don't know, a hula hoop, I don't know. But something really, and we say, oh,
With,
Reese and
with
bows.
stuff on it.
Did we
Animatronics
actually,
With
and,
moss.
but it could be that what would be not burdensome for the crew wouldn't be enough, and we want something more, in which case we have to pay attention to that in the budget and in the budget. So is that an okay thing? Having Barb?
Yeah, I think that'd be
let's
great,
start the
yeah, because,
conversation.
so we got over a year, well, not over a year, but almost a year to figure out whether to do it or not.
Perfect. Okay, then Barb, please do ask George to give it some thought. Okay, next item, council member.
Number 2, this is brought up by the same neighbor, and also my wife, we're ongoing concern about like the speed and like traffic on Strathmore. It was almost a year ago now that there was a car that flew through my neighbor's yard, airborne, flew across my yard and kicked the street lamp into the third yard. So it's ongoing thing. I just noticed recently that they've been taking apart like the striping down at Flanders. I think Barbara's going to try to look into that. I'm curious whether or not SHA or the county is not putting in a speed hump, kind of like they put on Beach Drive and or Tuckerman. So it'd be good to kind of find out if they did that. And I think also I got like, kind of like Phil did, got an advertisement from a company it's a vendor that sells kind of those kind of scare you signs to.
this is how fast you're going.
Yeah, you're going 39, you maybe want to think about it. And I'm wondering if that would be enough of a deterrent to people that might think, hey, I might be getting a ticket, even though we're not going to have me out there with a badge, like pulling people over as much as I might be tempted to. I wonder if that could be effective. So I'm curious, like what avenues we have to kind of push those. I guess it's not our road. We don't own it, but we own everything that abuts it. So I think we should have some influence on it, but curious what everyone thinks about pushing on the signs, I think first, and then I guess find out whether or not we should have any speed humps like those other places.
So at the county MML dinner last week, one of the delegates from a neighboring district talked about there being funding, an increase in funding for next year, in the next year's budget for things like this. And so if you ask me who, I won't be able to tell you. If you ask me any more details, I won't be able to give you any more information, except that I do remember there being something.
Okay.
So I do think that with some looking around, we'll be able to find a way to tackle that.
Yeah, hopefully we can. And even if we had to like chip in, I don't think those kind of speed signs were that expensive. It would just be, I don't think we could do it without permission.
Sounds good.
It's a state highway.
But I think it is an important intersection that
Yeah.
needs to be.
Let's do it.
I would just,
Maybe not even just down where I live in the East End, but like all the way up to the West End, like you regularly see people on.
East end of Garrett Park.
Do we need a motion or?
what I was going to suggest is, since it is a state road, I have a point of contact in the SHA District 3 traffic unit. I'll just let them, email them, letting them know that there is interest in this on the part of the mayor and town council, and just see at least if we can get a response from the state about it, if that would work for everyone as an initial step anyway.
Okay. Thank you, Barb.
All right. And your final item?
Okay, third is the request from the ladies on the left. So the basketball hoop, I think, was installed maybe like, I don't know, what, 1906. That's on the pool parking lot, and granted it is like supplemental to the full court that's over by Penn Place, but I think a lot of kids over the years have liked playing there. So in the off season when it's closed off from the pool, when the pool's not using it, it's kind of helpful. So I think it's not a really big expense. And the thought was, we just fix the slide at the park. I think it would be worthwhile. I would agree. It'd be worthwhile just get like a half decent hoop and put it over there next to the light. So curious of thoughts on that. And then the other thing is, whenever I've been out there playing with my sons, you get a lot of people to come flying down that Keswick Hill, and they go about 25, 30 miles an hour, and they make that right just to like shave off like 3 seconds by cutting through the lot. And there's been quite a few times, like almost every time I go there and play with him, like if we're playing, say, street hockey, I play it down at that end because I had to be ready to hear it, and I have a cute sense of hearing for whatever reason, to turn around and go, whoa, like where are you going at 30 miles an hour? And usually people they stop and then they're sheepish. They don't realize that they're even doing. So I wonder about the wisdom of when the pool lot is not being used by the pool in the off season, if we should not chain off that entrance, you'd still be able to get into it from the entrance down by Lincoln's, but you would not have those people coming flying through. Like you'd still be able to access it to go use the park or whatever, but just cut off that shortcut.
Okay, so you have a two-prong request. One is the basketball hoop.
Yeah.
How bad is the basketball hoop?
I mean, it's round.
I mean,
Bad,
bad.
Yeah.
That's all it is, it's round.
So it's like no
it's
net
round.
and-
It's round. There's no net. It's round and rusty.
Does it have a backboard?
It does. It's like one of the old small ones, kind of like if you have like Chuck Taylor's and you could get out there and pretend it's 1975. That's what it looks
We
like.
could get a new basketball hoop.
Yeah, what the heck?
I mean, that's under the limit, we can just go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
We'll take care of it.
Barb, please order a new basketball hoop, do you want the backboard and everything?
Yeah.
Does it need a new stand?
I don't have
New
very good aim, so I need back.
Does it need a new pole?
Yes.
I think so. Usually it just comes as a set nowadays. You get the pole and the glass backboard, and it's just,
I'll look at the reviews.
Thank you very much.
yeah.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
And then the other piece about closing off that.
But just one other thing is the lady on the block that requested that hoop, she noted that a lot of those things will be on sale shortly after the holidays.
Fantastic timing, we'll walk through
For the sales.
She's wise on that. The other thing I think, like Phil's input, I think would be helpful, is that intersection as well. Like, here's what
I do
people
it.
think. Yeah.
I do it, I don't know why, but for some reason, I don't even think of it as shaving off time, but I do go through that parking lot. I don't even.
right.
But if we want to encourage kids to play there,
Sure.
we should chain it off so people can't cut through.
And do multiple kids play there? I mean,
Yeah,
Some
we play
do,
street
but
hockey.
Some
and-
do.
see
range
kids
of
ride
people
their
do that?
bikes, like, and things like that. So
okay, cool, let's do it.
Let's invest.
Yeah, I think we need to explore.
Let's
because
explore.
There's probably
I think you
nothing
gotta
to
at least-
chain to.
I think Phil's trying to say something.
I was gonna say, along with that, can we look at getting the parking signs too? Because that'll also help.
Economy of scale.
The parking signs that Jean was talking about earlier.
So
Okay.
just make sure I understood that, like Gina was suggesting to just get more stout parking signs, right? Like more anchored in.
No parking signs.
No parking signs, because
So
the
kind of like what
problem
was
is
done.
there's temporary ones and they've disappeared, however, for whatever reason. It's just a matter of putting in several of the permanent ones.
So it'd be more like the ones that were put on Raleigh a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Like the 6 foot tall.
Sounds
yeah.
good.
Okay, so the time is 9:49, and we need to vote to enter closed session. So that vote is pursuant to the Maryland Code, General Provisions Article, Section 3-305B1, and that is to discuss the employment and compensation of candidates for employment over whom the town council has jurisdiction, and other personnel matters that affect these specific individuals.
And do we do that? Do we need to turn off the,
We will, yes.
We will.
Yeah.
It has
You
to-
close
has
the
to be-
meeting
So-
after this, right?
oh, sorry.
So I need someone to move to enter.
I'll
closed-
move to close the meeting
Okay.
based on what you
I'll
just said.
second that.
Jeremy, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. This meeting is adjourned.